Greetings and salutations, this is Emperor Vespasian and his trusty sidekick.
Hello.
We've decided that, you may have seen, we've done some videos on individual bolt action units before. We've done a little bit about the history and a little bit about what they do, and I'd like to do a whole series on each of my bolt action armies as we do them, to sort of explain how you can use the units if you want to buy them yourself, explain how the army works, and maybe a little bit more of the interesting history behind it. So I decided to restart the series of the Chinese and then go on to the Russians and the Polish and the Japanese, and this is sort of the beginning of that. So here we present our bolt action Chinese army. This is the complete army that I have so far. May not seem like a huge amount. We have 2 units of riflemen, 14-man squads with a light machine gun and loader, and 1 NCO. Then we have the sniper team, anti-tank rifle team, observer, and the command unit, which is the 3-figure base unit here. For the command, we base the figures together, so they're a lot easier to spot on the battlefield, and I just think it looks cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do the same with the teams as well, other than the light machine gun team, because that's part of the infantry squad. So the anti-tank teams and the sniper teams and all that, they're based on the same base. Because we used to fall out over which figure was actually the sniper and which wasn't, and which figure was the observer, and
It's now going
on the base. We can't argue anymore. So the 2 infantry units are the core of the army. They can both be mounted in trucks, which you can see at the back. We've got 2 armoured cars here, which are Russian-built armoured cars, 1 German-built armoured car, 3 British-built light tanks, tankettes, which are also amphibious, and 3 Russian tanks. That makes up the entire Chinese army. And of course, 2 Russian aircraft, 1 fighter and 1 ground attack aircraft. This is a fighter, a Polikarpov I-16 and an I-15 at the back. So this is basically our bolt action army. Right, the army itself is based on this, a little bit of flair there, which is the Chinese Army book, available from Warlord Games. If you go to the Warlord Games website, you can download this for free. It's one of the free PDFs that they do. Just download the army list and print it off. We laminated it, which is why it's so hard to see on camera.
Shines hot.
It's very shiny on camera because we have to use big lights in here, and it gives you the rules for the army and everything, which is quite cool. And we've turned all the units into gaming cards, which is these. I can't see if they're in focus or anything.
Oh, look. It's a little too shiny. You can put them in the middle there.
Well, I just put them like that. All the units are on card, so when you're using the unit, you just pick the card out and it's got all the rules and everything on the card. It makes it easier to use, especially when other people are playing. You can just keep everything on a sheet if you want, but we use cards, and we'll go into those later, and that's not really that important. But first, I'm going to go on the army itself. So this is a Chinese army for the early part of the Second World War. All the stuff, all our bolt action armies are early, because that's the fun times. So you've got a lot of dinky little light tanks. Anti-tank rifles are unbelievably powerful. Whereas late war, what's the point of having an anti-tank rifle? Really, it's basically an extra sniper team.
Ping, 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 ping.
Yeah, basically, yeah, that's what it is. So this is the Chinese army, as I said. Right, the Chinese army is quite complex. The Chinese started the war first. It was China and Japan who started the war back in 1937, when Britain didn't even know there was a war coming, and Germany was taken by surprise, and America didn't join until 1942, technically.
Russia was taken by surprise.
Yeah, well, Russia was fighting its own little wars. This army fought against the fought against the Japanese and fought against the Russians as well. So you can fight against the Russians if you like, or you can fight against the Japanese. So it is a useful army to have. Yeah. Anyway, I'll run through what the army book has to say about them. There's an army special. All armies in Bolt Action have a couple of special rules, which you probably know if you're already playing Bolt Action. But I'll just run through the special rules applicable to this particular army, as the others don't matter. So this army has Endless Numbers special rule, which is the same as what the Russians have. Basically, you get an extra free rifle unit. So you will start the game with one of these units free. It's to represent the sheer weight of numbers that the Chinese had at their disposal, in the same way that the Russian army does the same. The free unit is a green unit, so they've got the green special rule, and they're just a standard rifle squad. So they're quite straightforward troops, but it is useful having on the battlefield. Also, the Chinese rifle squads are quite large. They're 14-man units. Not as bad as the Polish, they're 19-man units. So the Poles are going to be really hard to fight. So the Chinese can take quite a bit of damage, an extra 2 casualties before they need to take a leadership test, morale test. Next one, for some reason, is World of Wonders, where Chinese peasant soldiers who've never seen a tank or aircraft before in their lives come face to face with it in battle, causing them to freeze in wonder and fear. No inexperienced infantry unit can assault fully enclosed armoured vehicles. In addition, they automatically fail a morale check when assaulted by tanks. Similarly, when within 12 inches of an airstrike, inexperienced units suffer an extra D3 pin markers. I don't really get where they got that from, to be honest. I don't know why they included that as a rule. China wasn't backwards. You could argue that Russia was far more backwards than China was. The Chinese knew exactly what these things were. They were used to aircraft flying around. They were used to even armoured cars and tanks. China had been fighting, just like Russia, a war from 1911. It was far worse than China. The Chinese were fighting a civil war, and there were tanks and armoured cars driving around all the time. So anyone with a rifle would have known what a tank was, and would have known what an aircraft was. So they wouldn't have been staring open-mouthed as Western technology flies over their heads and scares them. No, it wouldn't. So we don't use that particular rule for our games. But that is in the army book. You can use it if you want. And that's basically the special rules. So a bit about the Chinese army. This is the Chinese Nationalist Army. China had 2 armies. One army was the Communist Army, and the other army was the Chinese Nationalist Army. And all of them had originally been split up into warlords, individual armies based on an individual warlord family's forces. They were all amalgamated into the Chinese Nationalist Army in 1937. 1936. China basically gained one massive, huge, powerful army, all under one commander, who was Chiang Kai-shek. The communist troops originally didn't back Chiang Kai-shek, but they did ally with each other to fight the Japanese, and then later on it got even more complicated. So Chiang Kai-shek's troops were trained by the Germans. The Germans were allied to China. They supplied China with most of their bombers. The Heinkel 3, I think the Heinkel 3 biggest export market was China. The German army's biggest export market was China. So the Chinese troops used German equipment. So they wore German helmets, they wore German uniforms in a sort of dark green colour. They also used a olive green in summer. The communist forces used a light blue colour and khaki. Blue for winter, khaki for summer. The communist forces were mostly supplied by the British and the Russians. So communist troops would use British weapons and Russian weapons. A lot of communist troops used the the round helmet, the what do they call the British helmet? The Tommy helmet. So you could use spare Tommy helmets for the Chinese troops, just like I've been using the German ones here. The uniform kit was more or less the same as the German kit, although a lot of it was made in China. The MG34 was made under license in China. Then you get down to your basic weapons. According to the army lists, the weapons assigned to the soldiers are the MP28, which was a German-made machine gun, off the top of my head. The Hanyang rifle, Hanyang rifle 88, which was actually a copy of the Kar 98. So it's basically the same design rifle as the German rifle. It tended to be darker in colour. Many of the early German rifles were dark wood. By World War II they were using a lighter wood, but the Chinese kept using the dark wood. It's just so when you're painting your models you know what you're doing. So I've painted them with a darker rifle, if you can see that in close up. Next thing is the light machine gun. The Czechoslovakian built ZB-26, which was a German light machine gun, which was issued to the Chinese forces. Believe that was also made under license. In addition to that, they also used a lot of Japanese equipment. As soon as the war started, they were able to capture a lot of Japanese equipment, so they used the Japanese light machine guns. They used any Japanese equipment they could get their hands on, because Japanese equipment early war tended to be slightly better quality than the stuff that they were using. Some troops used the Enfield, the British Enfield.
The rifle?
Yeah. Which is...
Is that a gun where you fire one bullet and then you have to reload it?
All of them are. They're all bolt-action rifles. Other than the American M1. M1 Garand, which is... what is M1 Garand?
Fire 5 at a time.
8, I think, the Garand.
How fast is that?
I think it carries 8, and there's a magazine to carry, I think, 15. So you can fire quite a few rounds off with that. Yeah, so that's basically an overview of that. As I said, they were supplied by the Germans. German officers went over to train the Chinese army, and Chinese officers were invited to go to Germany to see how the German army was organised and how it worked. So it was based very much on the German army. The command structure was based on the German army, so it tended to be quite efficient. There was an officer training school in China which did churn out some half-decent officers. Unfortunately, it was rather corrupt, and a lot of officers used to get in with payments of cash. So you're not getting the best of the best, you're getting the richest, and that's never a good thing for an army. But you know, the Chinese did particularly well. They stopped the Japanese, and they defeated the Japanese in the end. So you could argue that the Chinese army was pretty good. As far as vehicles are concerned, the Chinese received many aircraft from many different nations. They used the Gloster Gladiator from the British. The main fighter of the Chinese army on the run-up to the war with Japan came from America, the American pea shooter. Very popular aircraft. Very nimble, able to land basically anywhere on a very short runway. It was designed as a naval aircraft, so it needed a short runway to land. As the war went on, they received Russian aircraft. By the time this broke out, they were using Russian aircraft. The Polikarpov, the SB-2 bomber, and the Polikarpov 515 as well, which is the two aircraft you can see here. So you can actually fight a game in China and use a lot of equipment from all over the world. So it's like a universal war. So you can use American equipment, American aircraft, Russian aircraft and tanks. You can use British aircraft and tanks, German aircraft and tanks. So you can really have a lot of fun with the Chinese army. And there's nothing to stop you using stuff out of your own collection that's already painted up in other colours and just use it for these. The BA-10s were issued by the Russians. They sold the BA-10s and the BA-6s to practically everybody. So they were pretty useful little armoured car. They carried a very high-powered, for the period, 45mm anti-tank gun, and that gave the Chinese considerable firepower in their armoured cars. Also, the German SDKF 222, which was used as a reconnaissance armoured car. The Tankette, Chowden Lloyd Tankette, which is the tiny one you can see here. That was just a tiny little tank, originally made by the British Army but bought by China. And of course the T-26, which I mentioned earlier. And, well, that's about all about the stuff that they had. The Chinese army did rather well. They did go up against the Japanese forces, who were far better equipped and far better motivated. A lot of the Chinese troops simply fought because they were in the army. By the time Shanghai fell, the Chinese were pretty despondent, but they did start to become rather nationalist, and so started to become better fighters because they were defending their homeland. Before that, they were just fighting because they'd been ordered to. And yeah, they did really well. Questions?
What about figures or the history behind them?
Anything. Whatever. You ask me any questions that you think, because they're usually the same questions we get asked on our videos.
Why did you paint them that colour of all the colours they could have picked for the Chinese army?
The Chinese army used the same paint scheme as used by Poland.
Why?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But they used the Polish paint scheme, which was the tan, brown, and dark green and grey. And they mixed all three colours together in patchwork, in a sort of patchwork quilt. It's designed to make it harder to see, make it harder to make out a target. I would assume it's because they did a lot of fighting in cities as well as fighting in the countryside, so the tanks were designed to be pretty universal in their colour scheme. Well, that's the colour scheme that they used. The Chinese aircraft are just painted in a light grey, which was a light green, which was the summer colour used by Chinese aircraft. Winter colour, they used to paint brown splodges all over the wings and stuff. Probably due to the terrain of the area. Next.
Why did the Chinese army use other people's tactics than their own?
Oh, well, many of the warlords used different tactics depending on what books they'd read or what they'd learnt. When the Germans started to train the Chinese army was in an awful state. China had been fighting a civil war since 1911. It was war weary. Its armies were pretty ragtag, and many Chinese troops still fought with traditional weapons because they were terror weapons. So Chinese troops would fight with swords and spears and things, not because they're particularly better in combat, but because they terrify. They were a terror weapon. So you'd go into a town, probably not even defended, and you'd all have swords and spears and stuff, and you'd start killing the local civilians just to make a point that you're there. It wasn't a very pleasant civil war. They used German tactics and German training because it was the Germans that trained them. So they had some of the German planning and German organisation instilled into them. Although they lacked a lot of the equipment to do what the Germans did. In 1937 they were actually more mechanised than the Germans were. The armoured, they had two armoured divisions which were more mechanised. All the troops were in trucks. When you look at Poland, Polish units still had horses and carts carrying their equipment. So every Polish platoon had its own horse and cart assigned to it. The Chinese army, they were using trucks. So that they were actually very advanced. Most of the Japanese, they were on bicycles or foot. And they were fighting the Chinese who were fully mechanized. Those units were fully mechanized. The units that fought them at Shanghai and Nanking.
Yeah, the Japanese still winning?
Yeah, the Japanese won. The Japanese had air superiority, which helps, and the Japanese had superior tactics. Yeah, the Japanese tactic was to attack. Just attack, constantly attack, don't stop. Same tactics as used by the Germans in Barbarossa. Don't plan, don't think, just attack, just keep moving forward, just keep going, because while you're advancing, your enemy isn't thinking. The enemy is reacting to you. The enemy isn't allowed to plan anything because they're doing something.
With you?
Yeah, so it's keeping the initiative. The Chinese tried to take the Japanese on tank for tank, gun for gun, but the Japanese, who couldn't really take them on gun for gun, they just went around them. They went around the rear, they cut their lines of communication, they just kept advancing. Same way they defeated the British in Malaya. The British could have easily defeated the Japanese if it came to a stand-up fight, but the Japanese weren't playing that game. The Japanese just kept going. If they met a strong point, they just ignored it and carried on going. Or they did Bonsai Charge it, which is launched a suicide charge. Well, not suicide charge. What we call suicide charge. But if the suicide charge works, it's not a suicide charge. It's only a suicide charge if it fails. Unfortunately, they tended to fail occasionally. But the mass attack is actually designed to have less casualties. So you charge forward in a fast charge and hopefully you overrun the enemy. And if you overrun the enemy, then long term you will lose less men. Because if the enemy are holding position, you have to send more and more and more men to take it. You're going to lose a lot more money in the future. So it's actually to save men's lives. It sounds silly, but it's actually true.
It's fast.
Yeah. The Chinese used suicide attacks the same. But as I said, a suicide attack is only a suicide attack when you fail.
Yeah.
The best troops in the Chinese army were the Muslim troops, the Marquis, who were... Well, they were suicide troops, they were nutters. And the Russians fought against them, and the Russians really didn't like fighting them because they had to kill all of them because they wouldn't surrender. And the Russia did technically win the war, but Russia wasn't particularly happy about the troops they were fighting against, and advised the commander at the front advised Stalin it might not be a good idea to go to war with China in future. Maybe we should try it with the Japanese instead because they seem a lot more weaker.
They're wrong.
Yeah, well. So the Chinese, there's some units I haven't added to this army yet because I haven't got them yet. I'm going to make some do or dare or die units, which are basically suicide troops. They're Chinese suicide troops who strapped bombs to themselves and charged at the enemy. They were all Muslim troops, and they were basically what we would call suicide bombers today. And they would basically strap all these grenades to them and run in and blow themselves up, which was a pretty normal tactic used by the Chinese nationalist troops. The communist troops didn't use that tactic. The communist troops, if they were losing, would just melt away. They'd just say every man for himself and everyone would just run away, and they'd reform over the next hill and then fight again. Whereas the nationalist troops, they just wouldn't give up. They just fight to the end, which is why they were so hard to fight. And at Chenga is when the Chinese defeated the Japanese. Chenga was the Stalingrad of China. When the Japanese got all sucked into the city of Chenga, and then the Chinese troops attacked them, surrounded them, and practically destroyed the army. And that's when Japan stopped doing the island hopping campaign and turned back to face China. There's a lot of falsehood in the Doolittle raid, saying that the Doolittle raid, the Japanese were capturing island after island after island, and then suddenly the Doolittle raid went ahead. For those who don't know, the Doolittle raid was a one-way bombing trip on Tokyo, launched from aircraft carriers by the Americans, and the idea was to bomb Tokyo and scare the Japanese into thinking that the Americans could hit them any time. But it coincided with Chenga. So the Japanese stopped advancing, taking island after island, and turned their forces towards China. It wasn't because of the Doolittle raid, it was just coincidence the Doolittle raid took place at the same time. The Doolittle raid dropped, 20 tons of bombs on Tokyo and various other cities. Completely irrelevant. The Japanese were just mildly annoyed by it. Whereas the Japanese army lost 300,000 men in Chenga. Which one are you going to think about most? You're going to think about losing an entire army group in China. That was the important thing. That's where the battle has been fought. That's where it was important. And the Japanese paid very little attention to the American part of the campaign. That's not to downplay the American side of the campaign at all. Or the British side. We did considerable amount of fighting. Or the Dutch. But it's just that to the Japanese, 80% of all Japanese soldiers fought in China. We were fighting the bits left over. So the Allied part of the war, compared to the Chinese involvement in the war, is tiny. Next question?
That's all questions I've got.
Can I think of anything else? This is the beginning of our thing, and I thought you'd have some interesting ideas.
Why'd you pick that basin?
Because of this.
Me.
My idea when I originally designed the army was to do the Battle for Nanking, Shanghai, because everyone does Japanese in jungles, which was, as I said before, 20% of the war fought in jungle, the rest of it fought in China. So to the Japanese, only 1 in 6, is it 1 in 5? 1 in 5 soldiers ever actually fought against the British or the Americans. All the rest of the troops fighting in China. So I thought the largest battles in China were fought in cities. Chinese cities are absolutely enormous, and each Chinese city was a Stalingrad. So I thought, why not do the army up? Because everyone else does stuff in they only do cities when they play Eastern Front, Second World War Germans and Russians. Why not do it in China? And I just thought it would be an interesting thing to do. And also that several films, which I can't remember the names of now, are all set in cities, and they're some of my favourite films set in that period, and I just kind of like that idea. One thing I would like to do is build an actual Chinese city wall, and then I could use it for bolt action for the big battle scenes. That would be pretty cool to do.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool to do.
Yeah, I think it would be an interesting look game. It would be different from all the other games that other people play. City walls in China actually became very important during the Second World War because they are defensive. And even in the Second World War, a 18-foot wall was pretty good. I mean, if you think of the castles and things that were built in Europe or the Middle East, the walls are tiny. We built tiny, tiny walls around our castle. The Chinese walls are 4 or 5 times wider than our city walls. The Chinese build everything bigger.
Like the Great Wall of China.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, Hadrian's Wall is just a wall. The Great Wall of China is a fortress.
It stretches nearly all across.
Yeah, and the Chinese are rebuilding it. They're rebuilding the old city walls.
Yeah, tell me about it, yeah.
Yeah, there was no... about 10, 20 years ago, China knocked down most of the city walls and started building houses out of them. And recently they started rebuilding all the city walls, but they're building them exactly how they were in the past. They're trying to recreate the past. And I think that's really good. That's really cool. And it also gives people a job.
It doesn't seem.
Yeah, and when you're on the edge of a recession, it's always handy to have everyone in work, paying taxes, therefore you don't have a recession. Something which our government seems to be mentally incapable of understanding. But that's just people. Yeah, so that's pretty good. Yeah. So I decided to do China because everyone else at the time was doing Germans, and at the time I didn't really fancy doing Germans because everyone's doing late war Germans, and I'm bored by late war.
I think I've been looking at YouTube. I think there's only a couple of people and you doing early war. Other people doing late war.
Well, I find Late War unbelievably boring. Because...
Isn't D-Day Late War?
Yeah. 1944 and 45 is Late War, and it's dull. It's just totally dull. The Germans shouldn't get any aircraft. The Allies get too many aircraft. The Germans have unbelievably powerful tanks. Unfortunately, the Allies never fought them. But they still do bolt-action games where there's massive German Tiger tanks driving across the battlefield. The Germans only had like 12 tanks in the Western Front. It's completely irrelevant. And yeah, it's not an interesting period. I don't like playing Late War. I don't like playing it. I find it boring. I don't mind Eastern Front Late War, but that's boring too because you're using a handful of German units against hundreds of Russian units. You're totally outnumbered, and the Russian stuff isn't bad, so the Germans aren't going to win. There's another reason I like bolt action as a rule system, because it does actually make it a lot easier to play, because some rule systems, if you play late war games, you can't kill the Germans just kill everybody on the table. So at least in bolt action it gives you a little bit of parity. Which is true, because the average Sherman can take out any German tank, regardless of what type of gun it's got. In fact, don't put a 90mm on it, because a 90mm gun won't take out a German tank because it won't hit. Firefly. Next question?
That's all I think.
That's it, that is absolutely it. Well,
Yeah.
that was boring, wasn't it?
No.
I don't know if we're bothering future. Right, so this is the overview of my Chinese army. I hope I've given you a little bit of the interesting history into it. I'm going to go into more detail of the history as we go down each unit, and also how it works in bolt action, how good it is. And that's it, that's the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you want to find out any more, just nip onto Warlord Games website, go to the free PDF downloads, and you can get the Chinese army straight off there for free. The bolt action game is available online if you want to go and get it. Actually, if you look at eBay, you might get it cheaper. This is cool. I love this book. And you also get a free one with the game. If you buy the D-Day game, you get a free rulebook with it. It's a little shorthand rulebook, which I don't know where it is. I've got a copy of it somewhere. No, hang on. No.
Right, balls.
Yep, found it. Right, so if you buy the D-Day game, there's a D-Day box set which you get a unit of Germans in it with an armoured car, and you get a unit of Americans, and you get that free rulebook in the box, and it's certainly worth the money.
Right.
So that's the original rulebook.
And the small one is one you get in the D-Day.
Yeah, and this one's where you
Is
get
it called D-Day?
D-Day rulebook.
Type in
I think it's called D-Day.
D-Day starter set.
Yeah. And yeah, because we just wanted to have a go and see what bolt action were like, and we bought that, and it was quite an interesting thing. The Germans from that set are Chinese now. That's the Chinese troops you can see in front of you from the D-Day starter set, which shows you can make them into roughly anything you want. Because it's cool. And I have the armoured car that you get in the D-Day box set as well, which is a SDKFZ 222. No, SDKFZ 251/1 Hanomag.
And if you're wondering why he grabbed that so fast, it's because right behind him he has a display of his favourite books and his favourite scenery stuff.
Well, the most used books. Yeah. Anyway, that's basically everything we have to say. Also, we're using our new gaming map, if you haven't noticed it. It's cool. It's cobblestones. So that's it, end of the video. It's over to you to do the talky thing.
So if you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe, and comment down below what questions you have to ask. Don't be shy, and Imperator Vespasian himself will reply to that comment. That's everything from me.
And that's everything from him. Good day.
Bye.